When your students design their own projects to work on, you are guaranteed to get their buy-in. And it's less work for you. Hi there, and welcome back to the series in which I take you step by step through every single day of my high school Spanish project-based learning classes. We are demystifying project-based learning and showing you how PBL can actually save you time as a teacher, so you can spend that time giving feedback to your students, connecting with your own family, or taking a nap. You deserve a nap. Today we're talking driving questions, aka how to take a topic or an idea and turn it into a fully fledged project-based learning unit that is authentic, rigorous, and increases your students' language proficiency. Side note, if buzzwords like authentic, real world, student voice and choice make you wonder how those actually look in the classroom, especially in a world language context, stick around. This video is for you. You should have, by this point, a topic or general idea for your project-based learning unit. If you're still looking for a PBL idea, you can click here for part 1 in the series in which I, without any prep work, come up with an idea just by listening to my students. Or you can click here and watch a video about questions you can ask yourself to come up with original PBL ideas that are relevant to your students. Now that you've got an idea, let's move forward to the driving questions. Is it possible for the students to make their own driving questions and still be rigorous and follow project-based learning best practices? Let's see if I can pull it off. So our class's topic that we've honed in on from last time is happiness or self-care or mental health in the midst of isolation from a pandemic. The goal for this session is for every student to leave with a personally meaningful project that they're excited about, that connects to their real lives, and that's completable. That's what we mean by a driving question. We start with our preliminary list of challenges that we came up with as a group last class. And I could have them immediately brainstorm more and then just pick one that they want to solve for their project. But here's something that I want you to be aware of when you're doing something similar in your classes. Yes, project-based learning is all about responding to real-world problems. In other words, not a problem out of a textbook, not a problem because it's convenient for me to teach my material, something that is an issue that exists out in the world. But the challenge with that is students can become demoralized from just seeing the world as a list of problems, especially in this pandemic. And so before we jumped into let's brain dump every problem we can think of, I spoke to them for a few minutes about how there are different scopes of problems. At an individual level, you may be feeling like the challenge you want to tackle is building a daily routine in this new normal. But there are also problems at a community level, like how there's less social interaction among our school community because we don't have a physical building. And then finally, there's a third scope of global problems or societal challenges, restrictions on our supply chain, or limited amounts of masks. I explained that we can't solve community problems until we ourselves are taken care of individually. And then our community can't solve societal problems until our community and ourselves is okay. Problems have different scopes, and it's perfectly reasonable to focus on yourself before you try to change the world. So I have them reflect for a minute before we find 100 million problems in the world. What level of problem are you personally ready and energized to tackle? Are you ready to have an impact individually? Are you ready to have an impact at the community level? Or are you ready to have an impact globally? So we categorize our list of problems from last class into different scopes. When you do this with your students, it's really important to impress upon them that we are innovators and we're making an impact, but we have to be smart about where we are individually and what kinds of problems we're ready to tackle. So when you're having your students create their own driving questions, encourage them to think beyond what thing they think is the coolest. Instead, challenge them to reflect on in what sphere they want to have an impact. Now that they've chosen a category of problem, I feel ready to let them go pick a problem from the list or to brainstorm further that they are personally invested in. Because this is a world language class, I'm meanwhile thinking about how can we incorporate the 3 modes of communication as we build this project. In other words, when you're having the students design the project, it doesn't just have to all be project management. You can include, as I did here and I'll explain to you now, content from your subject area as well. Here's an example. I give them an article written in the target language about what makes a good driving question. But this article isn't geared towards language learners. It's geared towards Spanish-speaking teachers teaching with project-based learning. So that means that this article is what we call an authentic source, which is jargon that just means it's not written to teach a language. It's written for an audience that already knows the language it's written in. It also helped my students for me to show them a couple examples of driving questions in the target language, because it gives them some scaffolding or some structure to model their own driving questions off of. And here's the magic. The students are now armed with a problem that they are personally invested in solving in their real lives and knowledge in the target language of what makes a good driving question. They are motivated to justify to you why they should do the kind of project that they want to do, and they know exactly what checklist they have to meet in order to convince you that it's a worthy driving question. So then let them do that for you. Here's what that looked like for me. In Google Classroom, I told them to write a draft of their driving question, and then to write 1 to 2 paragraphs to justify why it's a good driving question. Here's how. What about this topic makes it worth your effort personally? Why do you care about it? According to the article you read about driving questions, why is your driving question particularly strong? Refer back to the article in your response. And also, and this one's big, what advice they are looking for next, or what their next steps are. And now some examples. Here's some of what they came up with. One student writes, how can I create a plan to use space effectively in our house during quarantine? He continues on to explain that it's important to him, now that his home has converted into his school, he wants it to be a positive environment and an open environment, so that both he and his siblings can continue on with school. So he's focused on a problem with the scope of his family. He says that it's a strong driving question because it utilizes real situations, and it's thought-provoking for him. It represents a challenge he really does want to overcome. So now that I've seen what this student is thinking about for his driving question, I can respond with some more thoughts to kind of help him along. So I commented back telling him that he might think about groups of Spanish-speaking parents that he may be able to find on social media that could be interested in how to create a routine for your family during quarantine. It could have an audience outside of his family. All right, another student's driving question draft. How can an average everyday person help make masks for doctors and healthcare professionals? Because now there's a scarcity because of the coronavirus. She justifies this driving question as strong because it's provocative or thought-provoking. She's designing this question, which of course makes it interesting to her, and that it deals with a real problem that affects many, many people. I responded back to her with a challenge to think about how she could tweak her driving question to also include educating other people about how they too can help make masks. That way she might be able to have a greater impact on this really big problem that she's chosen to tackle. Now you're probably interested in hearing an example of a student who didn't pick it up just like that and who needed some more guidance. So here's an example of a student's submission whose first draft of the driving question wasn't really working. The original driving question he came up with was, how can I use movies to learn languages better? He and I had some back and forth in the comment section of this Google Classroom assignment. I want the problem that he centers on to feel a little bit more urgent. I pointed him back to the article which talks about an authentic problem or some problem that goes beyond the requirements or the content of the class. He went on to tweak this question to include popular culture overall, and thinking about how we could include other discussion partners or other students in different districts who are also trying to learn Spanish at this time. You see that these driving questions run the gamut, but they all reflect what the students really care about. If you're working synchronously, like your classes are meeting over video chat, I want you then to have the students peer workshop each other's driving questions. If you aren't using Zoom or something similar, you can have students do this on their own questions. But I had them ask a couple questions of each other's driving questions. Firstly, justify again, why is it important that you are the person to do this project? Why does it really matter to you? Second, what's going to happen at the end of this project? What's the so what answer? In other words, what kind of product that matters to people beyond your Spanish teacher can you create to show your learning and to have an impact like you set out to do? Third question, who cares? Who is the audience for your project? And I love asking the students this question because project-based learning teachers, myself included, we get super tripped up on who is the public audience. I have to go out of the school to go find some expert in the field to bring into the class and show them the students' projects. But it doesn't really have to be that. Because we already had the students reflect on what scope they wanted to have an impact on, whether it be their individual selves, their family, their school, their community, or a greater group, they already have a built-in audience. It's just a matter of how can they get their solution and their project to that audience. And they came up with some great ideas for that. And finally, I urged them to discuss or to clarify how are they going to document their process. You've probably been wondering by this point how Spanish content fits into all of this, and this documentation piece really is how. This is the nugget of wisdom from today. I realized that instead of me spending hours and hours and hours crafting a project, tweaking every word of the driving question, searching online for examples that I could steal, and then pitching it to the students after I've crafted the whole thing and hoping that they buy into it, hoping that they like it. Instead of all that, I asked them to build a project, gave them parameters of what makes a good project in project-based learning, and had them pitch it to me. A glaring issue we have not dealt with yet that I'm sure you are thinking about at home from the comfort of your couch is, when does the teaching of Spanish come in? I know. So, all will be made clear next week. I will cover teaching the grammar they need to know, teaching vocabulary, as well as letting the students chart their own path in what I call a launch document. But we'll get to that all next week. You all know I'm all about the concrete examples, so if you want another example of project-based learning for Spanish, you can click on this video right here. And if you want further guidance on how to come up with project-based learning topics, you should click on this video right here. You know, in this time, we need as many communities of like-minded educators as we can find, so please leave me a comment, please subscribe, let me know how it's going for you in your classes, and I'll see you next Monday for day 3 of this wild journey. Thanks so much. Bye.